Hi, I'm General Joe Martin. I'm your 37th Vice Chief of Staff of the Army. Today I've got the honor of having a discussion with someone who's a great ally with the United States Army, a great friend of the United States Army, Dr. Elise Van Winkle. She's the Executive Director of the Office of Force Resiliency at the Office of Secretary of Defense. Big title, big responsibility. Elise, thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much for the invitation.
Dr. Van Winkle, I wanted to have a conversation about something I've been thinking about. Since about the month of April, we noticed that we had an increase in deaths by suicide in the United States Army. And the senior leaders have been discussing this. We've had routine meetings and we've been discussing ways to mitigate what we see before us, and it's a complicated problem set. And we've come up with many different solutions to the problem, or we're working on changes to account for those solutions. But one of the things that I've discussed, and I haven't read a peer-reviewed report or anything of the like about this, but I'm going to make an assertion and ask what your opinion is.
Mm-hmm.
I think COVID has had an impact on the resiliency of our force. Specifically, I think COVID has created a state or a condition of isolation that has taken the soldiers who are led by our leaders and separated them from our leaders, even if it's temporarily. There's portions of the day, some days longer than others, depending on the state of the infection at the installation, where those soldiers aren't with their leaders. And it's always been my thought that soldiers being with their leaders is always a good thing, because the leaders can understand, can see, can feel, can smell, can understand the state of the resiliency of their soldiers. But equally important with that, they have the ability to be able to continue to develop their soldiers.
Mm-hmm.
And without that contact time, I ask myself the question, well, who are those soldiers in contact with? And what's the impact on the soldiers' resiliency? And so I've said that leadership is a contact sport. We've figured out how to do many things in the United States Army. We have soldiers training at combat training centers. We're doing basic training. We're doing training at home station. And if it's safe enough to go grocery shopping, it should be safe enough for leaders to check on their soldiers and spend time with their soldiers so that they can continue to assess and further develop the resilience of these soldiers, but equally important, continue the development of those soldiers. Am I wrong? And if not, why is this important?
I think you're right. COVID has really upended us in so many different ways. And the connection part has been a real struggle for folks, and something we're extremely concerned about. What we noticed with COVID is that while we knew there were risk factors for suicide, for distress, for unhealthy coping skills that would come out, we've always known there are risk factors to that. And we've always known that there's protective factors to that. And COVID upended those. And what I mean by that is risk factors became exaggerated. If you started off with something where you struggled with anxiety or depression, it's getting worse during COVID. The protective factors are compromised. We talk about how connections protect you, and very difficult to have connections these days. Virtual connections can help, but what we hear is it's just not the same. It's not the same as seeing somebody face to face. But we also have to balance safety, and that's a difficult balance to strike as well. So we are concerned about not only the immediate effects of COVID, but the delayed effects of COVID, how this is going to have long-lasting impacts on folks. The isolation is a really difficult aspect of this. And I think one of the things that we always knew was important was connection, but really underestimated how important it is. Within the military, the cohesiveness of the unit, those face-to-face personal interactions are really important. You're able to see if somebody's a little off, if they're acting a little differently, if they seem a little bit more stressed out. You can't always tell that on the phone. You can't always tell that even virtually. Sometimes You get that feeling of, they're just not acting the way they usually do. And we've tried to train the force that when you see that to reach out, and now we're in this environment where it's a little harder. And I think the solution to that is complicated, but one thing we're encouraging folks to do is to really be proactive, be deliberate in reaching out. Because you won't see them on a day-to-day basis, give people a call on a regular basis, check in with them, have touch points with them, and be, again, more deliberate in those interactions so that you can potentially find out if someone is struggling more than you had anticipated during this time.
I think you've taught me quite a bit by underscoring with your expertise and your experience what I thought was, an instinct that you just got to be in contact with these soldiers. What I sometimes worry about, when I was a commander previously, there'd be soldiers that on duty, when they were with their unit, when they were with their leaders, they performed very well. They looked good. Their competence was unquestionable. And then from time to time, you'd have a soldier that would, off duty, have relationships with people that have nothing to do with the Army, nothing to do with the values of the Army, and they had an influence on those soldiers, and sometimes the outcome was catastrophic. It led to less than desirable effects afterwards. A soldier was in trouble or worse. And what I worry about with this isolation is if we don't do what you're describing, you ask yourself, who is influencing those soldiers as they do whatever they do in their barracks? Mm-hmm. I have a child or two, and I know that the habits of those who are by themselves now may be a little different than the habits that I would have by myself. And so I worry about the impact and the influence of influencers that, in some cases, if we're talking social media, we don't even know who these people are. And so that's why contact, to me, is so important.
I agree. And it's something certainly you and I have spoken about, is this idea, and it's not just true within the military, I think it's true with everyone, and it's important for folks to understand this part of the human condition, which is that there is a difference between who we want to be, who we portray ourselves to be, and who we really are. That is part of the human condition, is kind of having those different aspects of our identity. And the goal is to have an authentic self, some part of you where you can be yourself, whatever that may be. What we find is that the human condition and life stressors make that extremely difficult, because we have that part of us that we portray to others. And then there are these parts of us where we have a history, where we may have made mistakes, where we're having challenges outside of the military, using that example. And how do we start to bring all of this together? The problem is that when there is that discrepancy between who you are portraying yourself to be and who you really are, the larger that discrepancy, the more unstable you are. And what we're asking folks to do is to reach out and talk to somebody about what's going on. Because I think it's life's big secret that we all have those struggles. And you and I have spoken about this. There is not anyone that I have met, the chiefs, the chairman, the vice chair who's spoken about this, who hasn't had times in their life when things have felt like they're falling apart on the outside. And yet you have to be the best that you can be in the military. How do you make sense of those two things? It's easy to try to keep it at arm's length. It's easy to pretend it's not happening. Unfortunately, that won't solve the problem. And so we're asking folks to reach out to leaders. If they don't feel comfortable with that, to chaplains. You can call anonymous support lines. The idea is talk to somebody about all these aspects of your life, so you can recognize that this is part of the human condition, that this is quite normal. It's normal to have parts of you that you struggle with, where part of you is having a difficult time at home and yet doing quite well in your career, and how do you make sense of those two things? Our ability to do that makes us stronger. The strongest leaders that I've met have been the ones who have shared their vulnerabilities to their folks and said, yeah, I went through this time. It was really tough, and I spoke to a chaplain and it helped me, and here's where I am now. Those are role models. Those are folks where they are sharing those vulnerabilities and how they got through it, that will help others who are feeling very alone in what they're going through. Because these other lives we live can really bring up a lot of strong feelings. The one we most worry about is shame. And there is a difference between guilt and shame. Guilt is the feeling that you've done something wrong, you feel remorse for it. Shame is that you feel like you are a bad person. There's a difference between those two things. And when somebody's having another part of their life and they're entering into that shame area, we get worried. And typically it is something that we can talk through and normalize, so they realize they're not a bad person. They may have stumbled, but they're going to get themselves back up, and we're going to help, and they're not alone.
I think you've brought up a great point. The Army's got this program, This Is My Squad, and it's all about this golden triangle. And in the center is the soldier, squad leaders up top, battle buddy for every soldier is to the right, and then the family. And the whole key with the triangle is establishing relationships that are based on trust, mutual respect, and empathy. For a soldier to be able to share something that he or she would not want to share with somebody else, you've got to have a trusting relationship with somebody.
Absolutely.
And that's why, and I understand there's other places that the soldier or the squad leader can go to get the appropriate help for whatever the circumstance is. But if you don't have a relationship at the lowest level within the squads, those soldiers aren't going to talk, but they will talk to someone they trust. And we've all seen this, where as you build upon a friendship or professional relationship, how over time that person is more willing to talk about things that they would never talk to you about as they met you initially. It's human nature. You're telling me everybody has something that they're not going to share. And those that we have the more intimate and mature relationships with, we're more inclined to share more with. That's why this golden triangle and the TIMS effort in the Army is so important to me.
I absolutely agree, and I think it's a very wise structure for the military, understanding that you have all of these supports in place, and how do they all start to work together. The aspects of the triangle, I think, are a great illustration of this, of who we are and who we want to be. That sometimes we're a certain way at home, we're a certain way with our friends, we're a certain way when our leader is standing in front of us. We're all the same person. And the important part is that if you have trusting relationships within that structure, that you are never alone in what you're going through. There's always someone you can talk to. And I will say, it doesn't mean that compartmentalization is not important. That we have a job to do, all of us. And when we're struggling on the outside, sometimes we do have to compartmentalize to get the job done. That's an important part. There's nothing wrong with that. But that there is some outlet where you are able to be your true self. Whether that is at home with a family member, whether that's with your friend, whether that's with your leader. It makes it easier to compartmentalize. And I'll share just my own vulnerability around this, that when last year we were releasing our first ever annual suicide report, first time we had released this report, and I was really talking a lot about risk factors. How do we know when somebody may be going the wrong direction? How do we help them? How do we reach out? During the release of that report, my uncle died by suicide. And I had to truly compartmentalize the release of the report, because all of the things I was saying in the back of my head were my own questions. Did I reach out enough to him? Did I miss a sign? I'm a psychologist. How did I miss it? And that was leading to a lot of guilt that I had to compartmentalize when I was doing my job here and making sure that I was serving the department and the force appropriately. But then I had someone that I was able to talk to after work, where I could break down, where I could say, here are the things I wish I had done differently. What if I had done this? And had somebody say to me, you know better than that. And you know that these things happen no matter what we do and what we try to do, that sometimes these things happen. It allowed me to do my job, but to also, again, have that place where I could be my authentic self back at home.
Well, if I can provide a compliment, you compartmentalized very well. I had no idea that happened to you, and I'm sorry for your loss. I can't imagine how difficult that was to do that. But I'm glad to hear that you had the opportunity to reach out to somebody afterwards to be able to help get you through that difficult time. But that's what we do in the Army in terms of, we've got to compartmentalize. We have soldiers who close with and destroy the enemy. That's why they came in the Army. That's why they came into the service, regardless of what service they're in. And they may have problems, and they've got to have relationships, so they have people to reach out to when these problems are concerning them. But they also need to be able to balance what they're doing in their job so they can stay focused on their job. You don't want a pilot of a helicopter to be thinking about something else when they're flying that aircraft. And so that's when they're compartmentalized. They've got good relationships with their colleagues and their leadership. They can get the help they need to help them with everyday problems that everybody has, based on what you said.
That's absolutely right. And that's what we're asking is, where do you go to be yourself? And we're asking a lot, and it may not be a family member or a leader or somebody within the military. It may be a confidential hotline that they can call just for an hour, be themselves and talk through things. That's what we're asking. Have those opportunities, have those outlets where you can talk to somebody and be your true self.
Because it's brave.
Absolutely.
To be able to seek out help.
Absolutely. It is one of the more courageous things that we can do.
Well, this has been very beneficial to me, and I want to thank you for taking time to talk to me. You have always been a great friend of the United States Army, and you've helped educate me in some areas that I just needed someone of your expertise to be able to reinforce a thought, an instinct that I had out there. But I think probably, to me, most importantly, is the importance of developing these relationships at the squad level, maintaining contact, being careful, balancing safety associated with it, but being careful because we have the ability to create relationships with our soldiers that will allow us to understand our soldiers, allow our soldiers to have the outlet you spoke of, and mitigate the potential outcomes of something that comes up that's a form of adversity in a soldier's life, or something that has always existed and continues to eat away at them as they try to be a soldier and being part of something bigger than themselves. But Dr. Van Winkle, thank you very much.
Thank you. I think you are truly committed to this area, and I think you are not the only one. And it's a reflection of your commitment that you sit with me today, and I think it's good for everyone to understand how much the Army is committed to this, and they want to help, and leaders want to help, and I think that's a message that's important to get out there.
Here's some things I learned today. Leadership's a contact sport, but it's not effective unless you can lead with good relationships, meaningful, beneficial, productive relationships. Those relationships are built on trust, mutual respect, and empathy. If our leaders can establish those relationships, soldiers will be willing to talk about what concerns them. Soldiers will be willing to spend time with their fellow battle buddies. Soldiers will be willing to seek out help and trust when the squad leader says, I think we need you to go see somebody. I would do the same thing. You got to trust me. Soldier says, I do.